My name is Debi Willis. I want to talk to you about a project we're doing right now in Patient Empowerment Work Group. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was trained as a software engineer, but I don't do that anymore. I have a software development company with brilliant engineers who work with me. Our focus is to monitor the healthcare regulations, the advances in technology, and also the clinic and patient needs with a focus to improve healthcare technology standards. That's very much a passion of mine. I'm also the co-chair of the HL7 Patient Empowerment Work Group. And I was one of the convening members, and I'm now a steering committee member of the HL7 Vulcan Fire Accelerator. I'm on the advisory council for care quality. I'm also a member of several other work groups within HL7, and my company is called PatientLink. And my contact information is at the bottom, and I'll give it to you again at the end of this if you have any questions. So a little bit about our Patient Empowerment Work Group. You can get to us easily by going to bit.ly HL7 Patients and find all about us. Our mission is to promote and amplify the viewpoint of patients and their caregivers in HL7 standards work. This is really new. And this is in support of HL7 mission. We were approved almost exactly a year ago. We meet on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you have any questions, please go to that link and you can find about whatever we're doing. So I have 3 current projects right now are the patient request for corrections to errors in their chart. I work on this with Virginia Lorenzi. The second project is patient contributed data white paper. Jan Oldenburg and Maria Moen are heading up that project. Advanced directives interop is being headed up by Maria Moen, who is working with the PASIO work group. So I'm going to go through the patient requests for corrections and give you a project overview. The main reason we're doing this is because there are so many errors in our charts. It's really scary. 3 independent studies were done. Geisinger just focused on medication lists, and they found that up to 95% of the medication lists were wrong. They had mistakes in them. Then NCBI did a study on just looking at progress notes to see what was the error rate in there. And they found that 84% of us have at least one error in our progress notes, but the average error of all the patients was 7.8 documentation errors, and some of those were pretty serious. And a third study was done by Johns Hopkins a few years ago, and they found that medical errors were the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. And many of those deaths were caused by missing or incorrect data. So we want to help solve that problem. So the name of our project is called Patient Request for Corrections to the Record. And our ultimate goal is to build a FHIR implementation guide to provide a standard way for bidirectional communication between the patient and the covered entity when the patient wants to tell them about correction, need for a correction. And our thought is that this guide that we build could be used by consumer-facing applications to allow patients to not only retrieve their data via FHIR, but also to contact those same clinics to inform them of an error in their chart. And Virginia and I are working on that. We started in about the summer of 2020. So we thought about how to automate this, and the first thing we realized we needed to do was understand the workflow now. It's a very manual process right now, and it's important to understand all the elements of that workflow before trying to automate it. If you don't understand the current workflow, there's no way to have a successful automation. So that was our first task. And I do want to say our scope is only in automating the communication request between the patient and the covered entity and the back and forth conversation that goes with that. We're not going beyond that narrow scope. We're not going to talk about the user apps or the EHR. That's not what our implementation guide is for. So the first thing we did, we looked at the laws right now. So HIPAA has the right for correction as part of that law. And we are told that patients should have a timely means to dispute the accuracy of their data. So we felt really good about that it's in writing, there's a law we can stand on. But there's also something else. There's a privacy rule and a correction principle. And in that, they highlighted that patients play an important role in ensuring the integrity of that data. So they pretty much gave us the key to say, yes, not only do you have the right to do this, but it's really important that you do this. And then we looked at GDPR. And GDPR's, they call it the right to Specification, and it's very similar. They have pretty much the same rights. The only difference we found is in the timing of a couple of things. Next, we invited an expert guest to our January HL7 work group meeting. And these were guests with different focuses, some from the hospital, some from patients, some from legal, and from Kelly. Kelly was an app builder. So we gathered all of this information, and this is what we came up with, that this is not easy. It's not easy in the paper world right now, and it's going to be really a focused effort to automate this. And what we found was that most patients are downloading and printing and filling out forms. A lot of clinics have a form on their website they want you to fill out, and then mail it in or bring it to the office, or sometimes people go into the office and pick up a form. So it's completely, well, I shouldn't say completely, it's very much paper-based right now. And so I also want to talk about why we want to do this now, not only because of all the errors. The errors have been around for a while, but what is really pushing us to do this now is because the ONC has mandated the use of FHIR for patients to gather their data, their records electronically. So as they do that, they're going to see a whole lot of errors in their charts, right? And so we felt it was important to allow them to have the ability to electronically submit a request for corrections. And so that's why we want to do this now before the tsunami of requests come in paper format and overwhelm the clinics. So the HIPAA and GDPR, as I said before, were almost identical in their patient rights. But HIPAA provides something very special, and I was quite excited to see this. They had something called implementation specifications, which I personally had never seen in a legal mandate like that, but it was very specific on what information needed to be shared and when. And so we decided to take that implementation specification as the foundation for what we're going to build. Our goal is to create something that's global, but we want to use the HIPAA implementation specifications as our guide. And in using that guide, the implementation specifications, we're going to meet the needs for both GDPR and HIPAA, the guidelines. And HIPAA, really, the specifications were kind of, they were really nice because that means this is exactly what the clinics are doing right now. So we didn't have to query hundreds of people to figure out what they were doing. They were doing the HIPAA guidelines. So that made it easier. So our next step, after we kind of figured out what is it that we need to do, we needed to search for the right FHIR resources. So last September, we met with the FHIR working group, and then we had many meetings after that with interested parties, whoever wanted to join We gave a voice to everybody to figure out what's the best way to do this. And so after all the meetings, the loudest voice that we heard really was we needed to test the task resource to see if that's the best resource to accomplish our goal. So we realized, okay, we're going to test it. It doesn't mean we're set on it. It means we're going to test that one first. So we had 3 scenarios that we wanted to test in our implementation guide. We wanted to test the patient requesting a change, and that change is accepted. And then the patient requests a change, and that change is denied. And then the patient disagrees with the denial, and then there's an optional rebuttal that the clinic can have. And these are all outlined actually in the implementation specifications. And so they were sort of easy to put into place to make this into an electronic process. So these are our first 3, our basic things. And here's where to find information about this. If you're able to download these slides, you'll be able to see this. So our results, there were several participants that played the role of the patient, and they were able to successfully use the guide to post and query the request for correction task to represent the 3 scenarios I mentioned. But then we had bonus points for more complicated things like back and forth communications, or a patient wanting to attach a document or an image, things like that, which is probably going to be quite normal. Once this gets implemented, patients are going to want to share things. So what we learned was that we're going to need to set up some codes for some of the areas in task, if that's the final resource we'll use. And regardless of what resource we end up using, we're going to need to set up codes to specify this as a patient's request for corrections. And we also realized we need to be aware of which fields are search parameters, and make sure that we fill those things out. What really was the biggest focus was the importance of having an easy way for that conversation to go back and forth, because it's multiple steps. So we focused a lot on that. And the feedback that we got from the people who were trying to implement this was that they really struggled with fitting multiple communications into the task input and task output fields. Those were the fields we were told to use. Task input being what the patient is saying, task output being what the clinic is saying. And it just felt awkward. And the second thing we found is really that there was a concern that a single task that was being updated by both a patient and somebody at the clinic seemed a sort of a strange way to support and preserve the conversation in the task life cycle, because it was one single task that 2 parties were updating. We weren't creating new tasks for every time there was a new communication. We also found that an app could accidentally overwrite previously entered elements of a task. So, and of course that was concerning to us, and we didn't know if that was due to the server not being configured accurately or whatever. But it was something that did provide a little bit of surprise to us. So here were the suggestions after the Correctathon. We were told, try using the task note for communications instead of input output. So we haven't tried that yet. That'll have to be in a future Correctathon. It was also suggested to prevent the overriding and the preservation of the conversation, to build a custom operation using note to just add another note instead of each time doing an update to the entire task. It was also suggested that we could use the task and communication resources together, so that the task could track the request, and communications could really handle all the communications back and forth, and there's no fear of overriding any previous communications for that. So our next steps, for first, we were told that this has been placed as a possible project for Argonauts this year. And actually that would thrill us because it's so important. Don't know if they have the bandwidth to do it or what they've chosen yet. We also want to get more EHRs involved at the table to discuss this and test this, because no matter how good of an implementation guide we have, no matter how much we want this to happen, if they are not on board, it simply will not happen. And so we need to get more involvement from them to see what they think is feasible to implement. We also want to get more HIE and HIM involvement in this, of course. So right now, we really have several resources we're looking at. The task only, which is what we tried in the January Connectathon. We're going to try to use that again in the next Connectathon with modifications. Being one modification being the task with a custom operation. There's also the suggestion we use communication only, do all of this via the communication resource. And then another is using task and communication combined. Now, all of these choices have the ability to, for a sophisticated app, to be able to share discrete elements in case the covered entity wants to use it to directly do the update. So ways to get involved. You can check out our work group homepage. We would love to have you get involved in our work group. And there's several projects you can become involved with, or you can just hang out and listen to us and join in on Thursdays. If you want to get involved in this project, you can contact me, Debi at mypatientlink.com, or Debi at mylinks.com, or Virginia at vlorenzi@nyp.org. She works for New York Presbyterian. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you will join us and be part of this important project.